Well, Matthew 24. We got through verse 15 last week. One whole verse. So that was good. We might get a little bit farther along tonight. We'll see. If you remember, in Matthew 24, as we've gone through here, there were two questions, and again we said the second question had two parts. In verse 3, where on the Mount of Olives, the disciples come to Jesus privately and ask him, tell us, verse 3, tell us when these things shall be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world. So we talked about those things, and what's interesting is Christ answers them in the opposite order of how they're asked. So the verse 4 through 24 of Matthew 24 deals with that last part of the sign of the end of the world. And as we've gotten up to verse 15, remember we found out we're in the middle of verse 15 there. Thank you, Eric, for let me know. Lisa, I guess, texted you earlier. Yeah, he said they were going to be watching from home. So.
Oh, yeah, she texted me before I left.
Okay, all right, good deal. Yeah, and she's got her bees, so there you go. Yeah, so good deal. Well, I'm glad you're home then. So, because I heard he was working overtime to make up for being sick last week. So, but thank you for letting me know. Remember, we got up to verse 15, and verse 15 is the demarcation between the first half of the tribulation and the second half of the tribulation, right? And of course, one of the things that we've talked about as we've gone through, and really, we're just going to be focusing on that 70th week of Daniel here, right? Of course, we know what precedes that's where we currently live today. But one of the things that we've noticed as we've gone through here is really you've got verse 4 through 14 is dealing with that first half. Verse 15 was the middle of that. And then 16 through 24 is going to be dealing with that second half of that tribulation period because of what takes place in verse 15, right? So we spent some time on verse 15 talking about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. And that'll get us up to verse 16 down through verse 24. And so what we'll do is let's just read those verses and then we'll get going. All right. Matthew 24:16. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Father, we want to thank you once again for your word. As we take a look at this next section, may we just allow your word to be the final authority, understanding what's taking place here, knowing that we're not going to be going through this time period, but it is important for us to be able to know what's going on, because even through all this, we see your grace and your mercy, and we see the things that you promised to the nation of Israel will come to pass, and the things that you've made promises to us, we know will also come to pass because you're faithful to your word. And as we take a look at these, may we remind ourselves of that. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now, in verse 15, of course, last week we talked about that issue of when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. We talked about those things last week, and of course, that puts us right here in the middle of that tribulation period, right? Now, as we continue on going down through here, verse 16 he says, and you notice the wording here. In verse 16, he says, then let them, all right? So one of the things that we've talked about as we've gone through that's slightly different here is, we've talked about, as we've gone through Matthew's not a chronological order type thing, right? This thing happens, then this thing happens, this thing happens, this thing happens. If you want the chronological look at Christ's life, Luke and Mark really do that for you. Luke especially, but Matthew is one of those we've mentioned before is more of a dispensational type thing, right? And so then he's given certain things at a particular time for a reason. And one of the things we talked about as we've gone through there, go back to Matthew chapter. Let's see, Matthew chapter 8. In Matthew chapter 8, there's just some things that's kind of interesting when you're going through here. That if you look at it compared to other of the three Gospels, does anybody remember how the book of Matthew presents Jesus Christ? How? King, right? How is it that Luke presents him? Son of man. But how is it that you have Mark? How does Mark present him? Servant, right? And it's like when you go into Mark, what is it? It's like he just hits the ground running. He's doing, right? And then John presents him as what? God, right? So you see those differences and things like that. So it's important to keep that in mind as we're going through here and looking at this. And I said Matthew 8, right? Go back to Matthew chapter 1 as well. Hold your place there and kind of keep these things in mind. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, it says, the book of the generation to Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, which one of those two were born first, Abraham or David? Abraham. But which one's mentioned here first is David. And of course, one of the reasons that we talked about that when we started Matthew chapter 1, and none of you all were here except for Delilah. Bruce might have been on that Wednesday night maybe. But it was one of those things, when Matthew presents him, he says, first of all, the book of generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Well, who was David? He was a king, right? And it's interesting because you go through and you can divide up the book of Matthew as he's presented as king, he's rejected as king, and then he's presented as the son of Abraham, right? And it's really interesting as you go through and you take a look at those things. And again, he's not chronological. He's not saying the son of Abraham, the son of David, right? There's a purpose behind all that. In Matthew chapter 8, notice in Matthew chapter 8, you've got Jesus Christ heals a leper, right? When he was come down from the mountain, of course, that's the Mount of the Sermon on the Mount that he does in chapters 5, 6, and 7. He comes down from the mountain. Great multitudes followed him, and behold, there came a leper and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus saith unto him, See thou tell no man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded, for a testimony unto them. So the first thing that we see here in Matthew, after the Sermon on the Mount, is Jesus Christ heals a leper. Now, the purpose of that is to show Israel that your king, your Messiah is here, right? And that's an interesting thing because that's the very first thing that we see there. Now, what's also interesting about that is that shows up here in Matthew chapter 8. It shows up in Luke chapter 5, right? That same account shows up in Luke chapter 5. Now, what's interesting about that is if you go down to verse 14. Now, I'm skipping the one where he's talking about healing the centurion servant for right now. But notice in verse 14, and when Jesus was coming to Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of the fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto them. Now what happens here is Jesus Christ heals Peter's wife's mother, which if he was the first pope, remember, popes, they're not going to have wives. And then one of the things that the churches there do is they'll say, well, his wife's mother's a bad translation. Okay.
Always chocolate.
Yeah, always. If you don't agree with something, well, it's just a bad translation. But what's interesting there is what we see is Jesus Christ heals the leper, heals the centurion servant, and then heals Peter's wife's mother. That's how it's in order in Matthew. Well, what's interesting about that is the leper is healed in chapter 5 of Luke. Peter's wife's mother is healed in chapter 4 of Luke. But the order there is different, right? And of course, why is it different? Because of the things that he's doing. Now, what's interesting is with the centurion servant, with the healing of the centurion there would be a picture of who? Be a picture of the Gentiles, right? So, first what Christ does is he comes to do what? To save and to heal Israel. After that, what is supposed to happen from that point on is what? That salvation is going to go to Gentiles. All right, and it's you see all these things, and they're pictures of one another. But what's interesting is notice in verse 11 or verse 10, after the centurion answers Christ, notice in verse 10 he says, when Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said unto this centurion, go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the selfsame hour. And again, what happens is you're going to have folks there, he says in verse 11, that many shall come from the east, west, and sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But what's going to happen is the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. And so then you've got that issue of what are they going to be going through? You've got the judgment, and then they're going to go into the kingdom, right? So it's an interesting thing. He goes and takes salvation to Israel. That salvation goes off to the Gentiles, and then you've got the judgment. Some go into the kingdom, some go into hell. You see a picture of a timeline there, right? They're not in order as far as time, but there's a timeline to that. Because if we take Luke as here's the order that it goes in, you've got Peter's wife's mother's healed in chapter 4 of Luke. The leper is healed in chapter 5 of Luke, and the centurion servant is healed in chapter 7 of Luke, which is not the same order that we have here. And so it's interesting because when we look at these things, that's one of those things to me that's just really interesting as you're going through Matthew, kind of keeping those things in mind. Right? There's a purpose behind that. That's true until we get here in Matthew 24, because what did we deal with in Matthew 24, verses 4 through 14 is the first half of the tribulation. Chapter 15 is right in the middle. And then 16, notice he says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. All right. So what he's saying is, as soon as you see Satan sitting and he proclaims to be God, then that's your cue, little flock, to do what? Run to the mountains, right? And it's interesting because he's not really, from time to time you'll see things chronological, but for the most part it's more of a dispensational overview of what's going on. And of course, he's a tax collector and things like that. So there's a way that the Holy Spirit uses his personality to think through those things and write it down as well, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that go along with that. But here we have the first half of the tribulation, the middle of it, and then the second half. And he says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Go real quick over to Revelation chapter 12. All right. In Revelation chapter 12, and we've kind of talked about these things before, so all we're going to focus on is just that. So I'm not worried about dispensation of grace. We're caught up and all that stuff, right? what we're going to be mainly focused on is this right here. Notice here in Matthew chapter 12, or Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars. Now, 12 is the number of who? Israel, right? It's really interesting. We were talking about this. How many times 12 shows up throughout Scripture? And of course, you know, number guy over here. I try to like rein a lot of that stuff in, but I'm really curious about numbers. But what do we see there is, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars. Right, so you got the 12 tribes of Israel. You got the children of Jacob. You got 12 there. 12 apostles. Right, 12 thrones where they're going to sit on it, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Verse 2. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Now, where is this first one? Notice in verse 1 it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven. Verse 2 it says, verse 3, and there appeared another wonder in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And it's interesting because this is, more of a historical viewpoint of the beast. But notice in verse 4 it says, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and he cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness. Now, when we're over in Matthew 24, and it says, when this takes place, then flee to the wilderness, here's where we are, right? And that's exactly what we see here. Verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness. Now, the woman here that we're dealing with is Israel. And it says, and when the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God. So, when they see that event happen, and in verse 16 he says, then flee into the mountains. Right?
That don't have anything to do with Matthew 24:19, where it says, woe unto them that are with child.
It's a different thing, but yeah. But you'd think that they would be. Yeah, we'll talk about that. No. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But notice, here's interesting. And the woman fled in the wilderness. Notice this, where she hath a place, what? Prepared of God. There is a place in the wilderness that they're going to go, and what's going to happen is God's prepared that place for them. Now, years ago, there was a guy on TV. He said, you send me your money. I'm going to buy non-perishable items. God told me to do this. I'm going to go buy non-perishable items, and I'm going to go hide them in the mountains in Jerusalem. And I guarantee you people sent him money. Now, the second part is, I almost guarantee you there's no cans of food out there either. But that's the idea, right? Now, here's the thing. Notice, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of who? Not the TV preacher, but it was prepared of who? Of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So, how long are they supposed to be there? 1,260 days. Well, that just so happens to be the second half of the tribulation period. And we see that there, right? 1,260 days. Notice, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole earth, whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now has come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of the brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. So what takes place is, up here in heaven, what's taking place? War. And according to that passage, what takes place is Satan and all his angels are what? Cast down during that second part. And when you see what is it that Satan's done the whole time and what he's going to continue to do is what? Verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, who was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. What's he done the entire time? From Genesis chapter, he's deceived the entire time, right? And the point is he wants to be like God, right? Isn't that what he says? I will be like the Most High. I will sit in the mount of the mount of congregation. Yeah.
Second half, when does the Antichrist come on the scene? The first half?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that the Antichrist shows up and he says, let's create a covenant
Right. So
for
where
one
does he
week or 7
go
years.
up there and then there's war?
Well, Satan's up there. This is different. The Antichrist would be a person.
Whoa.
Well, you remember when the Antichrist had the head wound, and so then Satan entered into him or something like that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, okay, wait. So how can you call it the Antichrist when Satan is not indwelling that person yet?
He does. But there's something else that goes on with that too. He's controlling him, all that stuff. The people give him the power. You have the unholy Trinity. They give him power.
So does the Antichrist?
So, hang on. Hold your place there. You're fine. Hold your place there. We'll put our brakes on. No, you're fine. Yeah.
Everybody's confused, right?
No, that's not what she said.
I'm saying everybody.
No.
Big.
1 Corinthians 12. So 1 Corinthians 12. And we kind of talked about this a little bit before. When you're looking at the Antichrist, it's a person who's going to have something specific.
I think that would be a good study. Like, I'm saying.
Yeah.
It would be a good study.
Yeah. But notice here in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles. Now notice he's talking to saved people. He's saying, here's who you used to be. You were Gentiles, not just Gentiles, but you were what? Carried away unto these dumb idols. How? Even as ye were led. Now, if you go back, Deuteronomy 4, Psalm 135, we'll talk about it in 1 Timothy chapter 4 coming up pretty soon. Who is it that leads people to worship dumb idols? Satan does. Now, when you go over in Revelation, he talks about you have the unholy Trinity. You have a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit type of Satan and all the stuff that he works, but you're going to have a person who is part of the world, part of that system, controlled by him, led by him, right? Just the same way as you have a saved person that can be led by Christ and led by the Holy Spirit, you're going to have a person that's going to be that way as well, right? Where's Satan, though? He's up there doing his stuff, and he's going to fight and get kicked out.
And then when does Satan entered the Antichrist's body when he had the head wound?
Yeah. Go to chapter 13, Revelation 13. And we'll come back to chapter 12, but that's a good question, so let's go take a look at it. In chapter 13, Revelation chapter 13, as I said, chapter 12, verse 3, you start seeing the historical view of the beast. Here in chapter 13, you see the political view. Notice in verse 1 it says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns." Who is it that we've already seen that has 7 heads and 10 horns? Is in chapter 12, verse 3, right? So, same context that we're dealing with here. "And upon his horns 10 crowns." And of course, we saw the 10 crowns back there. "And upon his heads the name of blasphemy." Well, how many heads? Well, again, you go back to chapter 12, verse 3, and it's 7 heads, right? Or seven crowns upon his heads. Verse 2, "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon," what? Gave Satan. We just read that in chapter 12, right? So here you've got the beast that you're dealing with here, and you got the 10 nations. They're going to be part of Antichrist and all the stuff that's taking place there. But notice at the end of verse 2, "And the dragon gave him his power." That was this part right here, right? He's just as when we trust what Christ did for us, God indwells us, and He gives us the power through the words, through believing the words, to do. And Satan's going to copy and mimic everything that God does. And so that's what we see taking place here, right? And it says, the dragon gave him his power. And notice it's not he just gave him power. He gave him his power. Right? Now, one of the things we've talked about before, what do we know about Satan's power in relationship to God's power? There's no comparison, right? And so then we talked about those things. But notice he says, not only does he give him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And you take a look at that, and what's going to happen is people are going to willfully admire this guy. Why wouldn't they? A guy gets shot in the head and he raises from the dead? Or he gets a wound to the head, I should say it that way. Because that's what the verse says. He gets wounded in the head, dies, and comes back. I mean, if you saw somebody do that today, what would you do?
They would have, but the problem is, even today, it would be wonders, but
Yeah.
people are saying
Mm-hmm.
that's happening all the time, but it's like, no,
Yeah.
it's not happening, or we would know.
No. Well, and of course,
It would be true.
what people have done just within the last few months is Donald Trump, right? He got more. No.
You didn't have a life threatening.
No, but that's what people wanted to do anyway. But I mean, people are going to look at that and be admiring him, right? And that'll be part of the Baal worship, and you'll see that in verse 4. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. They're not worshiping the beast; they're worshiping who? The dragon. They're worshiping Satan. And and so you start seeing this, not just the political part, but this religious part. Here you have the combination of church and state coming together. So it's interesting because, you look at things throughout history politically, and what happens is you see one group argue against something, within the next decade, they're arguing for it. And so here, what we see in our culture now is separation of church and state. One day that they're going to want that. They're going to want that political and religious and all that stuff coming together and being part of that. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Which you go back to Exodus 15, you see something that there. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things. Is it interesting that there's a mouth that speaks? How is it that God works? Through him speaking. How is Satan going to try to mimic that? Is through speaking. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Well, 42 months. How long is that? Can anybody do math that quick?
Is it 3.5 years?
All right. Now go back to chapter 12. And of course, there's some other things that goes on with that, but so we see what's going on with that.
So at what
Notice
point are you still answering that?
what
At what point does Satan indwell this being?
he's leading him the entire time, right? But at this point, he gives him power, and his power and his
So does he never
his seat.
indwell
Yeah,
the being?
the same way it would with any unsaved person. Yeah.
So it's not actually Satan in a human form.
Mm-mm.
It's the person who is led by Satan's power
Yeah.
the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
that makes more
So
sense.
the dragon was just a form of Satan. It doesn't.
It is him. Yeah.
Is it an
Not
actual
an actual
dragon?
person.
Well, as far as the beast, there would be the person, right? And remember,
Yeah.
dragon gave the beast his power and his seat and the authority and do all that stuff.
I guess I was just, because by now, he's been cast down on,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I was like, what form is he then?
He would still be that cherubim form, right? Satan would be
So
the four
that might be
the four-faced beast and all that stuff.
fighting, and then does Satan actually come down?
According to that, yeah,
So Satan and
his angels.
Satan and the Antichrist are both there?
Mm-hmm. I mean, according to the verse, yeah, yeah.
And then that's what I was saying, what form was he when he is, but does it give you more than the dragon is the only form it shows even?
Yeah, well, and again, the dragon there is, it's not a dragon, right? That's a name that he has, right? So you see in chapter 12, when he says in verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent. Well, the old serpent is what? Genesis 3, and we know that that's Satan, called the devil and Satan. Right? So we understand who the dragon is based on that verse. Now, if you look over at verse 13 of chapter 12, notice what happens. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, what did he do? He persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. So when he's cast down, him and his angels, what is their main goal going to be? They're going to try and persecute those people. Right? Which is why Christ says what? When you see this, flee. And the reason why is because I've prepared a place for you, and I'm going to feed you, and I'm going to take care of you for the rest of that time period. And notice verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. Why? Now, the wings of a great eagle should remind us of what? The Exodus, right? He brought them out as on wings of an eagle type thing. But why? Why is the woman given 2 wings of a great eagle? Here's why: that she might fly into the what? Wilderness for a time and times and a half time from the face of the serpent. Well, time, times, and a half time. Well, how long is that? 3.5 years, 1260 days, 42 months. Right? To me, it's interesting when you look at those things, you see how that's kind of split up. Yeah.
Why do you think the 3.5 years is repeated so much?
There's a lot of different places that it's brought up. It's another one of those things when you think about repetition as far as that goes, do they know how long it's going to be? Right? And we'll talk about that a little bit whenever we get in next part of Matthew 24. But I'm not sure why it's repeated so often, other than the fact it's just you can. But what's weird is it's repeated in different forms, right? But it's not always 3.5 years, 3.5 years, 1260 days, 42 months, right? So the idea of you can be able to, I think basically it's just so that they would know exactly how long they're going to be there, to let them know exactly what's going on. So that tells them exactly, once they see the beginning of sorrows, what do they know? They've got 3.5 years until this happens. Bible believers during that time are going to be able to say, I know exactly when that's going to take place.
What about Bible believers in America, in South America, in Canada? What do? Do they go over there?
They would have to.
They would have to.
They would have to.
That's the,
They'll probably have everyday rockets by then.
They'll get on Elon Musk's.
yeah. Underwater subways.
Yeah. But I mean, the idea is, no, I mean,
Everybody's gonna have to go to this area.
but they're going to have to be there anyway, right? Because there's a reason that they're going to want to be over there anyway, because they're going to know when the beginning of sorrows happens.
But I would imagine this would be a global,
It would be.
like anybody would.
I mean, you got to think, when James writes and he says to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, they're all over the place, right? But when they see the beginning of sorrows that he talks about there, they know that they've got 3.5 years. They're going to be able to pinpoint when that's going to take place. And they're going to know at that time, based on Matthew 24, what do we need to do? We need to go to the mountain. Because God's prepared a place for us there. He's going to take care of us. In fact, what we're going to see is he's provided things for them. Here they were told that they should feed her there 1,203 square days. So they know that they're going to be fed out there. But there's other things that we're going to find out in Matthew 24 that they're also going to be provided other things as well, and we'll see that. Yeah.
I guess two things, but I mean, I don't know exactly what time it will fall in terms of like feasts and stuff, but I mean, like, right, similar to how all of Israel was supposed to like fix it in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right, they could all be there, and then of course the abomination of desolation happens, and then they're like, oh, this is what God is talking about. We have to get out of here.
Yeah.
But then also wondering, I mean, in terms of Gentile believers, would they also be protected, or just Israel?
They would be part of that group, I would say, yeah. So it would just be like, just as if there were Gentile believers during Christ's time who were part of the little flock, they would have gone through that. They would have been, and you got to think, where is it that Christ told them to go first? To Jerusalem to preach. They're there, right? So to your point, Bible believers at that time, where are they going to go? They're going to have to go to Jerusalem. They're going to be there, and they're going to see these signs, and they're going to say, wait a minute, that's Matthew 24. It's literally taking place, not what everybody said back in 1993 and 2014 or whatever, but this is actually what we read in Matthew 24 is taking place, and they know that 3.5 years later that's going to take place, and they know, and it's hard for us to imagine this because in the dispensation of the grace of God, we don't have to think about these things, but there are going to be actual people who believe that book the correct way. They might be a small number, but there's going to be people, the 144,000 go out and they do what they're supposed to do. They're going to go to Jerusalem and they're going to start doing the things they're supposed to be doing. The feast days and all that stuff comes into play. They're going to know those things. And in fact, what happens is remember we talked about last week, he's going to cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So that means for this time period here, what are they going to be doing is what? Sacrifices. They're probably going to go back to the feast days. They're going to be there when they're supposed to be, and some of these things, they're going to see these things. They're going to know exactly.
Israel heavy.
Yeah, again.
Now it's like it's Gentile.
It's everybody.
Gonna go back to being that. I mean, not to say that Gentiles can't be a part
Yeah.
of that, but how would let's say somebody's here in America and they're believing this and they see everything happening. Do they go to Israel and how do they become a part of that?
Well, that would be part of the 144,000. The whole issue is they're going to have to go after Jerusalem and nation of Israel first, right? Just as the little flock was supposed to right after Pentecost. Their goal was to do what? Ye men of Israel. Now, could Gentiles be saved? Absolutely.
When you say the 144,000 go out, when are they doing that? Before the Antichrist comes on board?
Well, they're going to be doing it through that period of time until here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you do have that span of time in between catching away and the tribulation starting, and nobody knows how long that is.
No. And I mean, can you imagine, all right, if prophecy was still going on right now today, and we look and we see something take place, we believe based on the Bible, that's it. We're going to be able to say that's what that verse is talking about. We don't know those things because we don't have anything that points to the rapture's coming.
The sad thing is people do think that way, obviously. We know that.
Yeah.
And maybe they're not really saved. And
That's a possibility. It's an entirely possible thing. But when you see these things, we see during that last 3.5 years. So, to your question, Raymond, why is that repeated? I'm not sure, but it's actually repeated different ways, which I think is part of what's going to take place anyway. Now, and like I said, we'll talk about something with that in that passage in Matthew 24 as well. But so what we see there in Revelation chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, we see those things are taking place, right? And we see it's going to be 3.5 years. And they know exactly what a Bible believer at that time, they see that event happen, and what are they going to start doing? We're going to go. And we know that we're going to be fed because of Revelation chapter 12, but it's not just that. Go back over to Matthew 24. Did I answer all questions? Kind of? Okay. I just want to make sure. Matthew 24, verse 17. There's a couple things that's really interesting for me about this too. In verse 17, notice he says, "Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house." Now, stop and think about that for a second, all right? Now, in that particular time, what they're going to be dealing with is you've got somebody on the top of their house, right? Their house top. It's my world famous.
why are they on top of the house?
I'm going to tell you about that. But what's he say? Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. So he doesn't say don't come down. He says what? Don't come down to get stuff out of your house to flee. Because they're told to flee, right? Into the mountains. If they don't gather things in their house, what's that mean about is in the mountains? Everything that they need. They're going to be completely and totally taken care of out there. And you notice in verse 18, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. So not only are they going to be fed there, they're going to be clothed there, they're also going to be everything that they need during that last 3.5 years will be there. They're going to be completely and totally provided for. I mean, to me, that's just like that all the way throughout Scripture. God has always done what for the nation of Israel? Everything you need. What's he done for the body of Christ? Everything you need. I mean, you look at his names in the Old Testament. It's, I am, whatever you need me to be, I've got it covered. To me, I mean, we don't know how much of a mess this is going to be. Like we can read through the scriptures and get an idea and let our minds travel. Oh, I know. But I mean, we have no idea what it's going to look like other than what we see. But to know that God says, "Don't worry, I've taken care of it." To me, that's amazing. Now, go over to Matthew chapter 10.
Is this about them being on top of
Yes. Sheesh. I know. Matthew chapter 10. Now, in Matthew chapter 10, what do we know that's taking place in Matthew chapter 10? What's Christ doing at the very beginning of Matthew chapter 10? Calls out the 12, right? Okay. And he gives them a commission. Now, Delilah's question is, why are the people on the housetop? There's two reasons. One of them's here. Notice he goes through, talks about what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to go into the city. They're not supposed to worry. And again, in verse 10 or verse 9, he says, provide neither gold nor silver nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither two coats nor shoes, nor yet staves, for the workman is worthy of his meat. What's he saying there? You don't need to take anything with you. I'm going to take care of you. What's he already told the nation of Israel? What he's going to do in the mountains is what? I'm going to provide everything you need. You're going to go out and do the work. I'm going to provide everything you need. Now, down to verse 23. All right? Verse 23, they're supposed to go out. They're supposed to do they're supposed to go and preach the message, the gospel, the kingdom of his hand. Verse 23, but when they persecute you in this city, flee yet into another. For verily I say unto you, you shall not have gone over cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. The disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. It is enough for the disciple that he be as his master, and as the servant as his Lord. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more shall they call them of his household? Call them of his household. Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. When I tell you what I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in light, and what ye hear in the ear, that preach ye upon the what? What are these guys going to be doing over here? They're going to be on the housetop preaching. And when he says, when you see that take place, don't go in the house and get your stuff, get off the roof and go. And the best part is you don't have to prep for that because God's got everything over there prepped for you. You know, it's interesting. Everybody's like, well, I'm a King James Bible believing prepper. Well, you don't believe the verse then. If you really believe that you're Israel and God's going to do those things, He's prepped for you. Anyway, so what are they doing on the housetop? Preaching. Notice this, Acts chapter 10. What is it they're preaching is exactly what they're told to preach, right? You see that there? Huh? Yeah, Acts chapter 10. Notice this. Acts chapter 10. This is Peter here. Verse 1, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band, called the Italian band. All right? So, of course, Acts chapter 10, this is Peter and him dealing with the Gentiles and the unclean and all that stuff, right? Dealing with Cornelius. Notice in verse 7, all right? Cornelius sends for Peter here in verse 7. And when the angel which spake unto Cornelius was departed, he called 2 of his household servants, and a devout soldier of them waited on him continually. And when he had declared all these things unto them, he sent them to Joppa. On the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew nigh unto the city, Peter was up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, and he became very hungry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance. What's Peter doing there on the housetop? He goes up there to pray about the 6th hour. So, is there a particular time during the day that they're supposed to pray? Yeah. So, what are they going to be doing on the housetop is one of two things. If it's the time for prayer, what are they going to be doing? Praying. If it's not the time of prayer, what are they going to be doing? Preaching.
I just wonder why they're on top of the house, was it just a culture thing back then?
Well, you're up and you're able to speak out, right? And if you see some guy on the rooftop, you're like, that guy's a nut. Let's listen to him, right? No. But I mean, that's the idea is, huh?
In Africa, I've seen them do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, they're flat roofs and you're
They
just,
have big speakers up there,
Mhm.
that
And they're on top
jumping
of the
around.
roof,
Yeah.
teaching and preaching.
and they're probably doing it because of the Matthew 10.
Yeah.
That's the verse that they're probably using. But I mean, what are they going to be doing? If it's the time for prayer, they're going to be praying. If they're not, what are they going to be doing? Preaching. So it's an interesting thing. But in Matthew 24, what's he say? Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. If you're up on the housetop praying, or if you're up on the housetop preaching, what's he say? As soon as you know that this goes on, what should you do? Get down and flee.
Okay, wait, so preaching and praying on the housetop was a thing back then. Is it gonna become a thing again?
I would think it would have to be.
Yeah.
In order,
Like both ends of that spectrum.
yeah, because when Christ is talking about them, they're not going to go over the whole cities of Israel. That's during this time period. During that whole time period, they're not going to be able to go through all the cities. And what they're going to do is they're going to go from house to house. Somebody lets them in. You get up on the rooftop, and what do? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So I would think that would still apply, and it would have to, because what do we know that's taking place is there's a guy out here on top of the housetop doing what? And Christ says, get down out of the house and go. So that idea of them being up on the housetop has to be there,
It has to be, yeah.
right? So however that goes about, whether it's reinstated or whatever,
I wonder if it's something that is like, do people still do that?
I'm not sure. But I mean, it's one of those things, what do we know? We know based on that verse, there's got to be some person up there doing that one, right? And in verse 18, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. Now the field, one of the things we've talked about the field, is it the farmer out there in the field digging up crops, or is it the field, somebody's out there preaching in the field, right?
That would go along with the first.
It would go along with everything, because you think about the harvest is plenteous, the field, which is the world, it's ready to go, and we need people to do the work. So it'd have that same connotation. Could it be somebody out in the field working? Absolutely. But it could also be somebody that's doing what? Out in the field preaching to people. Either way, the main thing in verse 17 and 18 is what? Your stuff's out there waiting on you. Don't go grab your stuff, because if you think about this, Brother Jordan said many times before is when the rapture takes place, God's going to have to pull some of us twice, because we got our roots dug so deep in this earth. Obviously, he's joking, but the idea is, if God showed up, and we can be honest with ourselves and not be super spiritual and say, well, I would never say that. If God shows up and says, rapture's going to take place right now, would you think, man, I've got this thing I really want to do tomorrow. Can you wait? I mean, honestly, we would. A lot of us probably would. We got game night Friday night, Lord. Can you wait? Could you give us till Saturday morning? Right? I mean, Now, again, we can think about that and joke about that. No, we have no control over it anyway. When he decides to come and get us, he's going to take us. But if in this situation, if it was these guys right here, he says, don't go down in the house and get the stuff. Everything's prepared for you. What's a person who doesn't believe that verse, what are they probably going to do? I got this one thing that I need to keep.
Do you think they would still be let in and be part of the group?
At least,
They would, but would they go and grab that thing and take off? Probably. What more than likely might happen then is what? You're a little bit behind everybody. Somebody comes up and says, hey, you can't, it looks like you need some food. Would you like to buy some food? I don't have any money. Well, I've got this thing. And it's just, it could be anything. Yeah.
Or it could be like Lot and his wife.
Yeah.
You know,
And we'll
they're going back for their earthly possessions, or thinking that God's not going to provide, and they get behind him, they get taken, and you know, they don't get them.
yeah. And that's, so that's a good segue to my next verse, Luke chapter 17. But that's the key, right? So in Luke 17, remember, in Luke 17, verse 22, Jesus Christ starts talking about the second coming. In verse 22 it says, and he said unto his disciples, the days will come when ye shall desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and ye shall not see it. And they shall say to you, see here or see there, go not after him, nor follow him. So we see that the same context of where we are in Matthew 24, right? In verse 24 of Luke 17, for as the lightning that lighteth out of the one part under heaven shineth unto the other part of heaven, so shall also the Son of Man be in his day. Now, when you think about lightning out of one part under heaven shineth to another part, everybody's going to see it. That's the idea, right? Now, there's some things that's going to take place. He talks about the days of Noah. Drop down to verse 31. And in the day which he shall be upon the housetop, and his stuff in the house, let him not go down to take it away, and he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. Notice. Remember Lot's wife?
Did you know that? Did you know that was there?
I've read it before.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it's the same context of what we see in Matthew 24, right? It's the idea of what? There's something that I've got to, I know, Lord, I know you've said you provided everything. I don't need to worry about my clothes, but I've got this one sweater vest that I just really want to take. Because everybody should have a sweater vest. I mean, it should. Or, I think everybody should. Yeah, but I mean, that's the idea, right?
Okay, wait. What about their family? What if their family is inside the house? Do you yell, come on, let's go? You know?
hopefully they know that.
They should know, right? Again, if you've done,
Or everybody's on the rooftop.
well, and it's possible, but here's the thing. As the head of the household, everybody in the household should know this,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
right? And did you all just see it? Let's go.
Yeah.
But I want to get my stuff. No, let's go, right? And that's what the idea. And again, he brings this up and says, remember Lot's wife, whosoever shall seek to save his life will what? Shall lose it. And whosoever shall lose his life shall what? Preserve it. I tell you, in that night, he's taken us. What's interesting is Luke takes us to what? Right there. He takes us to that night. Notice, in that night there shall be two men in one bed. The one shall be taken and the other left. Now, again, he's already talked about in the days of Noah entering in the ark in verse 27. So again, this reminds us of what we're going to see over in Matthew 24 is one's left, one's taken. Who's taken? They're taking a judgment, an unbeliever. who's left? The one that goes into the kingdom, right? And of course, we got to keep those things in mind as we go through, and we'll see that back in Matthew 24. That's different than the rapture. In the rapture, what happens to the believer? The believer's taken. Who's left? The unbeliever. Exact opposite of each other, right? The one shall be taken, the other shall be left. Two women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, and the other left. Two men shall be in the field. Now, again, what do we know about the men in the field? Don't go back to your house and get your clothes. It's already provided. Two men shall be in the field. The one shall be taken, the other left. Again, could it be field that they're out there actually working in the field? Yes. Or could it be that they're out there preaching in the field? Either one of those, I'm not going to
So would you say
kick you out.
this would actually be in the middle of where the judgment is?
It's that right there. So what's going to happen, and what's going to happen is, think about this. He's taking us to, he's talking to us about this part over here, right? But as far as the taken and the left, but you got to think too, if there's two men in a field, what's going to happen to one is one's believing, he's going to go where? And the other's going to be left where? In the field.
So it basically, it would be already being judged back there.
That yeah, because the thing is they're going to, you've not believed yet, you're not going to believe, right? It's that type of thing. And again, we see that because he's taken us through that whole time period there. The one that's left in the field, he goes off into the kingdom. The one that's taken is off into judgment. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the what? Eagles be gathered together. Eagles, isn't that what we read back over in Revelation, talking about eagles' wings? The whole idea there is what? When you see this, flee to the mountains. Flee to the wilderness. I'm going to take care of you just like I did the first time.
Do you think there will be obstacles trying to
Oh, absolutely.
trying to prevent that from happening?
Absolutely. Absolutely, there would be obstacles. And that's that point that I was saying a minute ago. If I take time to go down in the house to get that one little trinket that I just got to take with me, that's going to put me in peril of possibly, because obviously I don't believe the verse anyway, right? And then, and it would all, yeah. So then you're, well, I don't believe the verse, but I'm going to go grab this thing and go. That would put you in a position of that obstacle, which would be the idea of Lot's wife. Well, it's better back there because out there, I don't know what I've got. I can look at the verses. I can believe God or not. And if I just say, well, I don't believe everything's out there that I need this one more thing, then you're going to have destruction there.
So different. The message is so utterly different. There's so much to do,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
It's, in a way, I would say it's like taking it and it's making it physical trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And we're spiritually
Yeah.
trust.
yeah,
And theirs is physical trust.
right.
And that's that issue of when we talked about that before. You've got salvation is not, they have the physical salvation first, and then they have the spiritual salvation, where we have a spiritual salvation first, and we're waiting for our physical salvation, right? The redemption of our body. They're two, like you said, they're two completely different messages. And try to mingle them both together to say the same thing is blasphemous. To treat God's word that way. And just say, well, it really needs to be said this way. And the moment we do that, if I ever say that shouldn't say that, it should be something else, kick me out. I might go fighting and kicking and screaming, but kick me out.
You would never say that.
Now, back over in, well, we're 10, 12 minutes past. Back over in Matthew chapter 24. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 19, and again, it's the same issue as we're going through here. Verse 19, but woe unto them that are with child, which would be what? Somebody that's pregnant. And to them that give suck in those days, which would be what? You have a small infant, you're nursing. You've had the child, but it's still small. He says, woe unto them that are with child and to them that give suck in those days. I mean, you think about those things. It's going to be tough for somebody in that situation. What would that person have to rely on?
Their faith in
They're going to have to rely on God and those others that's with them, right?
Or they don't have to travel.
I
Do
don't
we
know.
that?
I don't
Is
know.
that something that we can find out, or would the scripture say?
I don't know. I don't know if it says like a distance.
Where's the mountain? Where is that? Do we know what mountain it's in?
I have an idea, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Because, I mean, in Revelation 13 or something, but like when the dragon shoots out like a flood after them, like kind of, I mean, it's a picture of what's gonna happen, but like seemingly there's gonna be some type of path that they'll be like they're on this path and they'll be protected.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Satan can throw everything he can at them.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously, like they were no doubt, you know, when they were going through the Red Sea, you know, scared of the Egyptians and stuff like that. So like, it's not like, you know, wide open fields or just being able to
Yeah.
around them, nothing to possibly harm them. But it seemed like there was some path that they were protected on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
They will have correction.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Or would you say the woe, is that saying it's impossible?
I wouldn't say no.
I think it was be like, oh, like this is going to be hard.
It's going to be hard
Yeah.
for those. Yeah. But not impossible, right?
How long
Because of the condition that they're in.
How long
Right.
do they have to get to the mountain?
That I don't know.
Man, that's interesting.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it sounds like it's urgent. The
Yeah.
way these verses talk, it sounds very
it
urgent.
it does, but also like I mean, if you look at verse 20,
But the very next verse,
yeah, look at verse 20. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Now you got to think, if this takes place on a Sabbath day,
They have to wait.
they have to wait because that's the law, right? They're still under the law. They have, and he's saying, but pray ye, and notice there ye, everybody, the whole group, that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. And it's interesting because if you go back to Matthew 16,
that's interesting because God knows when it's going to happen.
yeah,
But still
gives them an instruction to pray for.
direction to say, you better hope it doesn't happen.
Pray that it doesn't happen here. Yep. And of course, there's a thing with that in Matthew 16. We talked about this before, and it's interesting because of what we've got going on. In Matthew 24, what do they say? When shall these things be? Give us a sign of thy coming. Give us a sign of the end of the world. In Matthew 16:3, he's talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Notice, the Pharisees also with the Sadducees came and tempting desired him that he would show them a sign from heaven. Right? So back in Matthew chapter 16, we've already seen that what's taking place is Sadducees and Pharisees are showing up saying what? Give us a sign. Verse 2, he answered and said to them, when it is evening, ye say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red. And lowering, O ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky, but ye cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given unto it. Given unto who? The adulterous generation. Is there going to be a sign given to the correct people? Yes. In fact, that's part of what we see, right? But the sign of the prophet Jonas, and he left them and departed. And of course, we see that there. But notice that issue there in verse 3. And they're able to look, and in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and lowering. You've got Sadducees and Pharisees here. They look up and they can see, well, the sky is red and lowering, so what do we know about tomorrow? It's going to be foul weather. Now, that word there, pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, is the same thing as foul weather here. So when we think of winter, what do we think of? Stepping on snow and ice and all that stuff. Here it's just talking about just bad weather and period. And it could be winter and all that stuff. But really you're talking about what? That issue of bad weather, foul weather, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say sometimes, but I mean, do you think Christ mentioned specific things as an example or as a possible hint? Because like he gives examples, right? Or he mentions the like ladies in the field, you know, grinding grain or something, or you know, on the field, or but then he also mentions winter, like you know, in terms of seasons, like were those just
That's
examples,
true,
or
yeah.
like, or maybe it could be you know during harvest, or you know during summer fall time, or it could be
Yeah.
winter. I mean, it's like
Maybe just to let them know that you don't know when it's gonna be.
Yeah, but I mean, you've got that issue of, and again, I think he's given examples as far as if two women are grinding in a mill, well, what is it that they're going to be grinding? So when is that grinding, when is that harvest normally going to be taking place?
I don't know, I mean, corn lies, you can grind corn and
No, I know, but that's the thing, like, right, and that should take us back to Genesis 8, right? When we think about that stuff, Genesis chapter 8.
seed time and harvest.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm so
And some sugar.
Yeah,
You had some sugar and some coffee, so you're awake. In Genesis 8, notice what we see. Noah builds the altar in verse 20. 21 talks about the sweet savor of that. Verse 22, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. And again, what he's talking about there is what? There's that issue of seasons. They're going to be taking place until when? As long as the earth remains, right? So there's something that we think of there because he brings up, and summer and winter and day and night shall not cease. Now, we could take Matthew 16 and say, well, winter, it could be just really bad weather, or it could be what? Winter. Now, there's all kinds of things we can do with that, but what's he saying? Pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. And again, part of the Sabbath day, they're not able to go anywhere.
But wouldn't they need to know how long they have to get there?
They will. And there may be a way to say how long it's going to take them to get there. Could be a Sabbath day's journey.
I mean, you think.
You
You
there might be something in there that would tell us that, how long it
When they
takes.
wrote that, there was no invention of car or automobile.
Mm-mm.
But, I mean, God knew that
Could be.
Like, I mean, you picture everybody on foot.
Hmm.
That's kind of how I picture
And it could be that way again.
Yeah.
With everything that takes place, it's entirely possible.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if they can't buy or sell unless they take the mark, you're probably not going to have.
It would be an underground secret type thing.
I don't think it would be an underground secret thing. I think it would be just as it was with Egypt. It's going to be right out in the open. Everybody can see it. This is what God's doing.
Okay,
Um,
that makes more sense.
you're not going to believe what he's doing, but you can see it. And all those people that say, well, when I see it, I'll believe, they're not going to believe, even still yet. So I would say it would be, I mean, everything in Matthew 24 has been what? You're seeing wars. You're hearing rumors of wars. You're seeing all these things. You're seeing all this stuff, and you're seeing. So I'm thinking when they start making that exodus, people are going to notice, and they might say something like, "Well, those guys are crazy, the little Bible thumpers." And they're just going to, well, just let them go.
Do you think people will travel, those who do believe will travel all over the world to get there?
I'd say they would already be there by that time. Yeah,
You think so?
I would say so, because they're gonna, if they believe the book,
Yeah.
they're gonna be going there doing what they're supposed to be doing. Yeah, I'd say they
They're
would be.
already gonna be there.
I would say so. Yeah, because I mean, if you can't buy or sell, you're probably not going to get a plane ticket. You're not going to get a vehicle. You're not going to get an Uber and all that stuff. But you're going to be miraculously taken there, just like it was with coming out of Egypt.
What do you mean? Oh, yeah, okay.
Question or
Well,
comment?
I was just thinking too, I mean, of course, I mean, it's conjecture, but I mean, cause Christ mentions, women grinding, and of course it's hard to say, like, is he just giving them an example to them, or is he like talking about the future, like there will be, women grinding, and then like, if he is talking about an actual two women in that time, like, would they be, old school farmers who are still, manually, grinding grain, or maybe, like, is there no, like, modern technology, and they're like, that's what they have to do to,
I think about that too.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that could go back to the idea of there's certain comforts that they're not going to be able to purchase. Like they're not going to have the best grinding mills. They're going to possibly resort to that. I don't know if that's going to be true or not, but, yeah, I mean, there's so much that's going on that's going to be destroyed and all that. Yeah.
So you're gonna have to go back to what you would call primordial or.
The primitive type stuff.
Yeah,
Just based on
basic.
the destruction that we see in the first half, I would almost see that all those things would be rendered almost useless. So then there would probably be on foot, and how long that is, I'm not sure, but that's a good question.
Because if you think, woe unto you, have children, like, nursing and you're pregnant.
It's not going to be
Riding
easy.
in a car is not that bad.
Yeah.
But if you're walking and you're in that.
If you're 8 months pregnant and you're walking, yeah,
Mary did it, so.
yeah.
I mean, she was on a donkey, but maybe they'll use.
Maybe they'll use donkeys and camels. I don't know. But I mean, that's some of those things, we kind of think about, because how are they going to do that? We don't know, but what do we know is God's going to get them out there.
When does the mark of the beast happen? Is it in the first 3.5 years? So that's already gonna be in place.
Maybe you got some of the Jews that still have a car, that if it falls on a Sabbath day, they're like, but I have losers, we have a Goya.
I'm glad you've noticed that. No.
but the grinding, I would say, and I was just kind of putting it as really, it was put there for the people that understood at that time, but also
Yeah.
See? Yeah,
It's like their duties
yeah,
Mhm.
are being
yeah,
done.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the way to look at it.
And one will be, they'll be right there together, like the
Mhm.
two in bed,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
sleeping,
Yep.
and like that.
Yeah.
It's like right together. both
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. And that goes to the point of brother against brother, brother against father, father against brother, son, and things like that. You know, mother and daughter. Then there'll be that issue. Like there will be people. It's like, Dad don't believe, he's staying. I'm gonna go,
Yeah.
and that's going to be a tough decision to make. And it's not the thing that a lot of people use it today. That's going to be an actual tough decision to say, like, I mean, could you imagine for a second you saying, none of my family can go with me. I've got to go to Jerusalem and nobody else can go with me. How hard of a responsibility and choice that would be.
And there may be some people who be like, I can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, even then, like, you know, or like, and again, this is just, you know, you let your mind kind of go with this. Like, you've got one child and you're like, me and this child's got to go. And then the other ones are screaming after you, don't leave us. And it's that idea of, I've got to go and I can't look back.
Whoa.
That would
Where
be,
did the other kids go?
I'm saying if there are some that don't believe,
They don't.
I'm saying if you've got family members that don't believe and you and another one do, and you have to leave.
Small baby children.
No. I'm talking about children in life. I'm just saying, like, can you imagine that process of having to think through that? And I couldn't imagine.
And, let's say you have family or parents. You're like, well, at least I need to swing by.
Yeah.
I can't get them to come with me.
Yeah. Can I go by and persuade them one more
Like
time,
those
try to get them?
little-
Yeah. It's hard for us to fathom that because we don't have to go through that, but there will be people and possibly people we know that have to make that decision like that.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's odd to think about, but to your question, it's Revelation 13, after that.
Oh, it's after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, and again, we can speculate all day.
It's interesting
But
to
you-
think about future events that was written then,
Mhm.
but future from us. Like, that's a hard thing to get your mind wrapped around.
It is. It's hard for us to think of a world where the things that we know
It's
don't exist.
not going to be like, that world's not going to exist.
Yeah. I mean, you think about somebody that's 100 and something years old right now. They went through Great Depression. And you have somebody that's 100 years old and they went through the Great Depression and you're trying to teach them about Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and YouTube. Just go watch this video. I mean, how foreign that is to them. Everything that they knew as a child no longer exists. Like for me, I don't know of too many people that have rotary phones anymore. I grew up with that. You all have probably never seen them. Have? Okay, well, good. But I mean, you think about those things.
Like, maybe.
Raymond's like, yeah, I used one last week. No. But I mean, there's things in our life that we just take for granted that won't exist in a decade. And that's one of the things I had to tell my kids at school all the time. I was like, when I was in high school, IT guy wasn't a title. You didn't go to school to go be an IT guy. That did, and of course, that's all. When I was in high school, when I graduated, that's when it came out. But when I was in high school, internet didn't exist. You got to think about that stuff, right? Like how much that's changed to where we had no screens. If we did, it was one tube screen that had 3 TV channels on it. And if you didn't like what was on, go outside. Right? And but now you have so much information. And one of these days, there's multiple things in our lives that we'll think that'll never go away.
Okay.
And it will.
But I do have
That's
one
just
more
crazy.
thing to ask and
Yeah.
say or something. We take the Bible literal, we take the Bible literally,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so much in, obviously, Revelation alone. Do you take it literal?
Well, you take literal what you know is literal, and you take figurative what is figurative, and you can tell that. Like, for instance, dragon.
Yeah.
He's not a dragon, but that's a title. It's a name, right?
But it's not literal.
It's not, but it is in other places. We can see some things like that. But like, he's not a serpent, but that's a title given to him, right? It's a name that's given to him. We know we know he's a cherubim. We know that he has 4 faces. We understand the wings and all that
That's
stuff.
what it is.
All that stuff is, yeah. But I mean, you take a look and you know what he looks like based on other passages.
Like, it's like Romans and Philemon, not hard
Hmm.
to take things as figuratively, like literal.
Yeah.
Know? But when you get into all this future stuff,
Hmm.
it's heavy.
It is. No, absolutely it is.
But it's understandable, otherwise it wouldn't be there and
Yeah.
there wouldn't be directions on what to do.
Yeah. But no, that's a good point. I do want to finish up with this, and then we'll go. Verse 21. He's talking about these things, and he says, "For then," and again, remember, verse 16. He says, "What? Then let them which be in Judea flee into the wilderness or into the mountains." Verse 21. You see these things. He says, "For then," where's the then? It's right here. "Then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be."
And we've heard about that more next
That is heavy stuff right there. When you think about that, he says there's great tribulation. You've not seen anything like this since the world began. How many of those people living during that time were there at the beginning of the world? None of them. They have no clue. We have no clue what that's going to look like, what it's going to be like.
It's utter and complete and total destruction.
It will be. It'll be chaos. And in the midst of that chaos is structure.
Are we going to talk about that more next week? That
Mm-hmm. Right? So, and again, you see some things there. He talks about the day shortened. We'll talk about those things as well. All right?
I feel like I'm about to bounce off the wall. I'm sorry.
All right.
This was really great, though.
I'm telling you, I'm enjoying Matthew.
Yeah.
We were the other day. I was watching Joel's podcast, and I made the mistake of saying, "Hey, everybody," and he's like, "Greg Racer, come be a part of it. I love you. How's Delilah?" Anyway, so we were talking about that, and he's like, "So what are you teaching right now?" I was like, "We're going through Matthew 24." He was like, he was like, "What's your favorite part?" I was like, "It's impossible. It's impossible." I was like, "What's really neat is knowing how to understand it now compared to how I was taught it as a kid." The way I was taught as a kid is you're right there in verses 4 through 24. You're part of it. Ready? Yeah. That's like, never mind. I'll save that joke for some other time. All right.